Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this reconvened Pittsburgh City Council budget hearing. I am Councilman Kraus. I'll be chairing this initial budget hearing, and then Councilman Coghill will be taking the chair, and then Councilwoman Strasburger will be taking the chair. But at this point in time, we have before us the Citizens Police Review Board. The director, Beth Pittenger, is the executive director, Beth Pittenger, is with us online. But to begin with, I'm going to ask our budget director if he would begin by reading the mission of the Citizens Police Review Board.
Absolutely. The Independent Citizen Police Review Board promotes responsible citizenship and respectable law enforcement through mutual accountability. The broad mandate of the Citizen Police Review Board is to provide independent review of the conduct of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. To accomplish this assignment, the board will thoroughly investigate specific allegations of misconduct, hold public hearings to examine such allegations, evaluate current police procedures, and promote safe, professional, and effective law enforcement practices through the public education on rights, responsibilities, and police authority, and make recommendations to the mayor and the chief of police regarding police policies and procedures. A board comprised of 7 members appointed by the mayor and city council presides over the work of the staff and determines all final dispositions of cases. The board conducts public hearings and renders findings and recommendations to the chief of police and mayor as related to the matters or complaint under review. A quick overview of the CPRB. It's focused on the following: investigation and complaint disposition, community education, board and staff deployment, and administrative. There are currently 8 positions allocated in the 2023 budget for the CPRB, which is no change from 2022. And a summary of non-personnel. Overall, there's $2,520 added to non-personnel items for conferences and investigator training and for rent.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Peter. Director Pittenger? There you are. Hi, how are you?
Thank you, Councilman Kraus.
Thank you. You have the floor if you would like to make opening comments for the council members. I should have said this. I apologize. Councilman Coghill is joining us. Councilwoman Strasburger is joining us. And Director Pittenger, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman Kraus, and good afternoon, members. And thank you for accommodating me and letting me come in virtually. As was just presented to you, the board has a very broad responsibility in terms of police accountability and enhancing the practices of the Bureau of Police to assure the public that they are consistent and compatible with best practices in law enforcement. We have this year received and processed 220 complaints, and in fact tonight the board is convening a public hearing on unbecoming conduct of Pittsburgh police, and it's an opportunity for people who have had an unpleasant experience with a Pittsburgh police officer that the individual feels was rude or discourteous to come tonight and tell the board their story. From that, the board will take into consideration the testimony they hear this evening and produce a report which will reflect their impression as to whether these are isolated incidents or if there may be some underlying training deficiency or something that could be done to enhance the demeanor when police are encountering individuals in the community, so we avoid these allegations of unbecoming conduct. And I want to say also that the board is by no means anti-cop, anti-police. They have, over the last 25 years, been adamant that they perceive the role of law enforcement as it was intended to maintain order in the community, to assure people feel safe at home or when they're engaged in activity in the community at large, and that they too have, the police, that they too also have an obligation, and they are also exposed with the vulnerability of criticism by the community at large, as well as the mechanisms of oversight. We have not approached anyone about expanding our services. You may recall last year we submitted a proposal that would vastly expand the services of the board to fulfill the referendum from 2020, which expanded the board's obligation. But we realized that we were a little, excuse me, we were a little bit overzealous in going from our 6 staff to 30 staff in 3 years. What we would ask is that council consider adding a position of administrative support to our office. We do have 4 members of our investigative unit. We have a community liaison coming on. We have a lead investigator who handles all of our intake, and we have an assistant director and myself. We need some administrative support. We need a secretary or someone who can handle some of the meet and greet in the office, the clerical responsibilities, reporting responsibilities, bill paying, and that sort of thing. We need a little bit of help there. We did not bring this up when we had our budget meeting with the administration, but other than casually, but the more we spoke about it internally, we realized it's something that we really do need. So I would ask your consideration to add a secretarial position to our staff. You may recall that in May, there was released a joint performance audit conducted by the CPRB and the city controller. There were a number of recommendations contained in that performance audit that are underway, are being fulfilled by the administration. Probably the most prominent one was the audit's concurrence that there should be a study of the force, manpower, and with no gender bias intended there. But just how many police do we need, and how should they be distributed to fulfill the community caretaking responsibility of police as well as the enforcement responsibilities of the police. We recommended that as a result of that performance audit, and we also are aware that that study is underway, and we look forward to seeing what the outcome there and recommendations will be. There's no question that there's an issue related to a shortage of officers, and I know there has been some discussion about eliminating the 60 college credit requirement for applicants, and we've been publicly opposed to that idea. And frankly, the board issued a report on that 20 years ago related to that particular requirement and why it was important. I think, Councilman Kraus, I appreciate the time. You know I could go on for hours, but out of respect for you and the work that you and your colleagues have, I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So, Director Pittenger, knowing you and the high esteem in which I hold you for as many years as I've been honored to serve here, I know your passion, and I know you could absolutely go on for hours. But for the sake of brevity at this moment in time, I am going to turn it over to Councilman Coghill. I know that he does have some questions, and then as members join us, I'll bring them into the conversation as well, too. But I do greatly appreciate you being here, Director. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilman Coghill.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Director Pittenger, for all you do. I know you've been at this position for some time now. How many years has it been?
I've been here for 23 years.
23 years. Is that since the inception of the Police Review Board then, or no?
Well, actually, the board came to be in 25 years ago, in 1997. And I had a predecessor who was here for about 9 months, and I came in thereafter.
I see. Okay, just a couple quick questions. You had mentioned you have is it a public hearing, you said, of unbecoming conduct of Pittsburgh police officers, and that was this evening, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and is that just broad in general, like people could just come and grieve stress their grievances as to unfortunate experience or an experience they think should be voiced? Is that signaling certain situations, or is it just broad across the board, open to the public just to come and kind of give their complaints?
I mean, it is an open public hearing for anyone who wishes to participate and offer their thoughts. However, what the board has done, and it's several years apart, they will convene what we call a rude and discourteous hearing. Not that the hearing is rude and discourteous, but for the number of complaints we receive alleging unbecoming conduct, which makes up about 60% of all complaints every year, and that's been consistent. Those complaints are not all founded complaints, but there are a number of complaints that you know something occurred. You know that there's a civilian who is distressed about their encounter, but you can't reach it to take it to a public hearing focused on a particular officer. And so the board will hold them aside, and they will put them in a category so that when there's a good number of those individuals, they will call for this particular hearing, which will occur tonight. Those people are invited directly, personally, and anyone in this year that has made a complaint alleging unbecoming conduct did receive an invitation to come. Anyone from the general public that wants to participate will be recognized for a minute this evening if they so choose to offer any comment to the board. But it is a process that it's not there to bash cops, and not at all. But we do know we have individuals who are carrying a grudge or have had a very, very unpleasant experience, and they need to have the opportunity to vent that. And the board needs to hear about those occasions so that they can consider whether it's a unique personal thing or if it is a systemic policy related, or if there's some need to look at how officers are prepared to go out into the community so that when they encounter people, and we have to remember that the officers are carrying the same kind of experiences and trauma and that make them respond to situations differently, as well as the civilians who are encountering them. So it's an opportunity for the board to receive information and evaluate all of that, and then issue a finding, an opinion about, is it unique, or is there something we could do as a community to improve those encounters?
Okay, so it's really a format for people to vent or to discuss what may or may not have happened to them. Are they subject to investigation if somebody comes there and says something that, raises eyebrows? Could you just pick that out and say, well, let's talk about this and investigate it, or do they have to go through a formal process for that? We could if it was egregious and if it was something that we had not previously looked into. Because as I said, some of these are complainants whose case did not rise to the level of going to a targeted public hearing on their event, but we know something happened. We've already investigated it. Sure, okay.
And then if something else comes up, sure, we could look at it.
Got it.
And what's important here is that in these kinds of situations, the other side, the police officer side, we have to acquire that somehow. We need to know both sides of the situation. Mm-hmm. It's not a situation where somebody can just trash a cop and think that they got away with something. Right. It doesn't happen that way.
Right. And you answered one of my questions. I typically know what you're investigating from the 6 o'clock news, typically, or through the newspapers. But you said there's 220 complaints that your office had looked into. And that tells me that there's a lot more going on than just what we hear on the 6 o'clock news, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I am interested.
When you consider that 300,000 and some calls a year are answered by Pittsburgh police, and to look at it in terms of only 220 individuals came forward to us, I mean, they could be going elsewhere, but yeah. It's a very small amount, but it can be indicative of systemic issues, and that's what our board has always focused on. Is there a bigger picture here?
Sure. Okay, and I am interested in hearing your explanation. Now, when the mayor decided to eliminate the credits to become a Pittsburgh police officer, number one, I thought it was a good move, because I think there's a lot of people out there who would make excellent police officers that might not have those credits, and therefore we're not they're not going to go to school to gain those credits just to become a police officer. And we set it up whereas they're going to gain those credits while employed or going through the training. Why do you feel that is not a good? Why do you feel eliminating those credentials is a good or is not a good reason?
Well, it serves as a good screening tool, for one thing, to demonstrate an individual's commitment to pursuing the qualifications for whatever career position they are selecting. I mean, if it requires that you have 60 credits to apply for a job, then you get those 60 credits to apply for the job. But what it does is it demonstrates an individual's capacity and ability to succeed in a rigorous environment, in a disciplined environment. It creates the interpersonal skills that many people do not have prior to going post-secondary school. There's the rigors of education that instills a certain level of self-discipline, analytical skills, social skills. It's character building. It gives an exposure to the human condition, if you will. Indulge me on that. It expands a person's view of the world, which they're going to be encountering. There's the old brain versus brawn issue, use of force, discerning when and how to solve problems. There's that rigorous personal development that goes along with either a 60 credit or equivalent experience.
Yeah, I understand that, and to a certain degree, I agree with you. However, I will tell you, I feel like I would have been an excellent police officer, but I myself didn't have the opportunity to get those credits and therefore would be ineligible. Not that I'm thinking about switching careers, but I just got to imagine there's a lot of people in the city of Pittsburgh who would seek that employment, but don't have the opportunity to get those credits. So I feel like we're eliminating a population that we so desperately need at this point to gain police officers. So, okay, I just wanted to hear your opinion on that. Thanks for all the work you do. I don't have any further questions, and I'll support your extra staffer if it's so needed. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Strasburger.
Councilman, thank you.
Councilwoman Strasburger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Beth, I really appreciate all the work you do. I apologize that I had to step out for a period of time to take a phone call that was urgent, but so if I'm asking a question that you already covered, my apologies. But how do the number of cases that you're seeing this year compare to last year and the trend from previous years?
I think that's something that shines brightly back on the Bureau of Police. This is 220 complaints thus far this year is, I believe, the lowest we've ever had in the last 25 years. Now, we've had as many as 580 some complaints, and we've watched it dwindle. We've watched it spike up. We've watched it come down. 220 complaints, I think, reflects well on improvements of the relationship between the community and police, although we have to be cognizant that we have a captured audience, so to speak. We can only measure that based on people that come to us. But the breakdown by zones also shows that there's been little change in the per zone complaints. They've remained pretty consistent, but overall, these are fewer than usual, Councilwoman.
Thank you. And
what I will say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the nature of the complaints has also changed. We have experienced years where egregious incidents have occurred, and there's been a commonality perhaps with the use of force or with violations of pedestrian stops, searches and seizures, warrantless activities, and those have also dwindled, where we're seeing now the majority of complaints being what we're going to hear about tonight, and that is the demeanor of police officers, which can be attributed to a number of factors, maturity, age, etc. Age on the job, not chronological necessarily. So we've seen that change. We've seen the nature of the complaints changed to now what I would consider to be serious, but less serious than the kinds of the complaints we've received in the past related to force or warrantless activity.
That's interesting. And again, if you've covered this, my apologies. What recommendations from the audit are currently being implemented or considered?
Well, the manpower study that I guess it may not have been, it wasn't initiated from that. It was something I guess we agreed with, but we did strongly encourage it. We encouraged looking at the shift schedules. And I understand they're going back to 8-hour shifts. I mean, a 10-hour shift would be nice for 4 days a week, but you're losing. And so when we have a shortage of officers to cover the shifts, and we're losing shifts because of our scheduling, it's a good idea to go back, and we recommended that we return to an 8-hour shift. Those were pretty much the major ones. There are some that are related to, I don't want to say bookkeeping, but related to the record management system. Of course, with certain degree of urgency, connecting the city officers to the dispatch system, the county dispatch system, so that it's integrated and that the information that is coming out of CAD doesn't have to be replicated or caught into a proprietary system that the city has been using for years. The elimination of that proprietary products that are in use by the city to use more of a, I guess you could say, a CAN system that's integrated directly with the dispatch system at the county level will be a huge efficient change, and we recommended that, and I understand that that is underway. I'm not sure, since we've been waiting since 2012 for them to move to an electronic run sheet, that it's going to happen overnight, but I do understand that they are working on using a different integrated system now with the CAD.
Excellent. Thank you for that. My last comment followed by a question is, or really observation, I guess, 2020 and into 2021 were the years where CPRB, Bureau of Police, and City Council, through its budget process that we're currently in, got the most public scrutiny. I'm sure if you looked at those, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if we did, I'm guessing that 2020 there was a spike in the number of police investigations, complaints against police, and certainly there was more interest in this exact budget hearing that we're sitting through right now in those years as well. During, following that, that really kind of intensive scrutiny, there were various reports that were released, recommendations, and while I realized that you are not in charge of implementing them, from your vantage point, you were such a wealth of information for us, and from your vantage point, have you, despite the fact that there's a new administration and there's maybe not the same continuity, have you seen some of those recommendations be implemented that you think are positive, or those that have not yet been implemented that you think still need to be, that are within the control of the mayor or city council, as opposed to taken up by arbitration?
Well, you will recall that post-George Floyd summer and what we all went through, and then we attempted to issue a report that we had engaged the Densest Group to assist us with. That report was ultimately issued, and it contained a number of recommendations related to control, public order control. I believe that some of those recommendations are being implemented by specialized units, but I think the kind of chaos that we've seen with the Bureau of Police, and this isn't on anybody's individual leadership doorstep, but just generally, that organization has been in a bit of chaos. I mean, organizationally, we've had the changing in the administration. That's true. We've had the change in the work shift. We've had a lot of new officers come on. We've had a lot of officers leave. There's a lot of activity going on in that organization, And so when we add additional recommendations and then we have a demanding expectation that they comply and they do something, I'm not sure the organization is capable of doing that right now, because it seems that they are in a bit of a reorganization themselves. Now, the reports that we did issue and recommendations we issued, I know that many of the crowd control kinds of recommendations we made, and the difference between the rapid response team or SWAT team or the CERT team or all these different teams, I know that that's been, they're looking at that, how they can maybe redo it so that there's a little more cohesion, but I can't speak for them. I have not found that the Bureau is resistant to recommendations that we have made. We have the opportunity to review policies and procedures before they're implemented. And that's done quietly. It's not something that goes on the news, but we have a good rapport with their Office of Accountability and Strategic Planning. And so we have an opportunity to discuss best practices and policies that might be more advantageous, or, just little tweaks to policies. And that, I think, bespeaks a cooperative relationship. I think where we still have the concern from the public and from us, and probably everybody, is the way in which disciplinary issues are handled. And that, again, comes back to all the variables that are involved in a process like that under the working agreement, and what is okay and what's not okay. We have now, officers don't have to live in the city. So that's introducing yet another element of I don't know, curiosity or something we have to be wary of when we're talking about reducing or lowering the qualification for to become a police officer. Who's coming into our town to be a cop? There's so much chaos involved in putting our Bureau of Police where they should be, where they want to be, internally and externally, that I'm hesitant to say, yay or nay, they're doing what we're asking them to do, or they're not. And that's not trying to sidestep, Councilwoman. It's just that I think there's a lot of chaos in that organization right now. And that doesn't mean negative or that they're falling apart or anything like that. I'm just, organizationally, how those dynamics can be fragile. So I think we're comfortable right now that what we recommend or suggest are received, those recommendations are received respectfully. And where they can implement, they do. And if there's some other obstacles, we can usually talk about what those obstacles might be, and maybe we've made an unreasonable recommendation. But I think it's a much different environment now. You may have heard, and I think Councilman Coghill was noting that we opened an inquiry into the preparation for leadership in the Bureau. Sergeants, lieutenants, commanders, what kind of pre-service in their new rank, what kind of pre-service training and activity do they engage in? What's the leadership training? What's the ethical training? How do we prepare them for a new role, which carries additional responsibility and authority? How are we doing that? And frankly, we asked for material back on November 15th, which should have freely been handed over to us, and we're still waiting for it, because the law department has to review the request. Now, those are the kinds of things that come up that are almost like out of the blue, like what happened here? Why is this all of a sudden an issue? I don't know. I don't understand that. We'll figure it out. We'll get what we need to do the proper review of the preparation of our police leadership. But they're incidental things. In the past, it would have been anything and everything we asked for, we wouldn't receive. So I think it's a much more cooperative, mutually respectful relationship that we have. And I think that the summer of 2020 and through 2021 has had an impact on both the expectation and the ability to fulfill, and how do we find that mutual agreement? How do we get to the common ground?
Thank you. I don't think you were sidestepping at all. That was a really informative and helpful answer. Certainly informed me. And I just hope that once we reach that sort of next inflection point, whenever or whatever it is about, that the that there's no way that we can be accused of not learning the lessons of the past, and that we will have implemented the changes that are necessary. So, my hope is that we find a police chief soon, and that the chaos will diminish soon, and that, everyone will find their footing, and we can continue to work collaboratively. And I'm glad to hear that they have been receptive to your recommendations. So that's good news. Thank you again for the work that you do every day and for being here today.
Thank you.
Councilwoman, thank you for your remarks. Executive Director Pittenger, I have no questions for you that have not already been asked or addressed. So I only want to take this opportunity to thank you for, did you say 23 years? 23 years of service to the city of Pittsburgh, and to thank you for being timely here in being able to come for your budget hearing today. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Director. And I will now turn this over to Councilwoman Strasburger, turn the chair over to her. She will be chairing the budget hearing for the Office of Municipal Investigations. So I'll step away.
Musical chairs all afternoon.
Yeah, why don't you move up into the mainstream here with us? He doesn't bite. Oh, right.
Sorry, I didn't actually tell you.
Yeah, not chair it, just move up closer.
Peter, I've actually never been to a budget hearing
Oh,
before.
it's generally painless.
Well, I don't even need to reconvene it. We did not recess. My name is Erica Strasburger, and I am pleased to chair the Office of Municipal Investigations. And so, as we did previously, the department will hear update from Municipal Investigations. I'd like to invite our Budget Director, Peter McDevitt, to give a brief overview of the department, and then we'll turn it over to the department.
Thank you. The Office of Municipal Investigations is responsible for coordinating the receipt, analysis, and investigation of citizen complaints of alleged misconduct by employees of the City of Pittsburgh. A quick overview of the department: allegations of misconduct, pre-employment investigations, and residency compliance. There is a total of 8 positions in the 2023 operating budget for OMI, which is no change. And there are no other changes to their budget overall.
Excellent, thank you. Would you like to give a brief overview? Do you have any remarks to make?
Not necessarily. Originally, my only ask had been for a DHR investigator for the discrimination, harassment, retaliation complaints. That request then got pushed to HR just because it made sense that that individual would work with their employee relations coordinator. This way? Okay. I lost my train of thought. That's okay. I did grab some of our numbers. Currently, we've received 206 complaints against police so far this year, which is a little bit higher than what we had last year. And we have opened 40 cases combined against all other city departments, which is about 5 cases higher than normal. So we have about, the month left of December. So our numbers are a little bit higher than last year. In addition to the 5 civilians that we have as investigators, we have 5 police detectives that are detailed to OMI. So we do actually have 10 investigators that work for us. I think at one point, one of the asks that we had, and I'm not sure if it's included here, was a step grade increase for my civilian investigators. This past year, 4 of my 5 civilian staff left employment with the city to take opportunities elsewhere just because of the pay. So after, putting all the training into these individuals and asking them to take on more complex cases, it would be nice to be able to elevate their pay slightly. I think it was one step. I'm not sure if that's still listed in the budget.
Councilman Coghill, do you have any
Just
questions?
A few. I'm sorry, what was your name again?
It's Aaron Bruni.
Aaron, okay, Aaron, thank you. Yeah, I guess, Aaron, in listening to you, it sounds like almost like you have the same problems as our police department. We train them, we put them out there, and then they leave for other departments because they're offering higher pay. Mm-hmm. So what's the training look like on your end? Is it extensive? Is it just
There's a couple weeks of orientation,
Yeah.
just more like on the job, walking them through our process, what the investigation process looks like, how to properly identify allegations from an intake statement, then sitting in on those interviews with other investigators in our office. We've had a little bit of a break because when we brought some new people in, there have not been any police academy classes for them to sit through. But for our civilian staff, we do like for them to attend a lot of the police academy classes so that they know what officers are being trained, so that they then know how to evaluate complaints, whether, policy has been followed or not.
Imagine, especially for the civilians, there's got to be a training curve there. You're losing more the Pittsburgh police, we could always replace them with other officers, but so you're losing the 5. You lost how many?
We lost 4 of our 5 civilian staff.
5,
We are back up to full staffing.
you are, okay.
One individual actually, after 2 weeks at his new position, it wasn't a good fit and he has to be reinstated, so we brought him back. He was our most senior civilian at that time, so we were happy to bring him back quickly and not have filled his spot.
I don't see it on my paper. What is the current salary for the civilian positions?
Has been moved to the next step up per the director's request, manager's request.
Yeah, and I believe we're going to do that at like their 5-year mark. So once they've been there for 5 years, as long as they're in good standing and have progressed, then they would be increased.
So what's the starting?
Do you have that in front of you?
It's about 60,000.
$60,000 for a civilian. I don't want to call them detectives. What do you call them?
So it's a civilian investigator, which then is also less than the police detectives that they're working next to and handling the same cases. Obviously, like the police detectives have arrest powers and they can always be called back to the streets, so their jobs are slightly different. But in our office, they're doing the same work.
So 60,000 after 5 years, it bumps up to what? I'm looking at you, Peter. I don't expect Aaron.
It would just depend on if
Okay.
they were promoted to another position or if they're just getting the annual cost of living.
And we just
increase.
made that change this year?
Yeah, that's a
So
change from
incentive
last-
for them to stay on, obviously. I mean,
had
and
been
it makes sense.
It's hard to interrupt you. It
No,
had been
it's okay.
approved for the 2020 budget, and then, of course, when there was the 10% line item for COVID, that was the first thing that went. At that point, no one in the office had attained that 5-year mark.
And okay, that's clear. And I guess I'm a little confused, like, I feel like you overlap with HR in some ways. Like you said, you had 206 cases?
Mm-hmm.
And of those, do you have to kind of sort them out yourself and say, this one's for HR, this one is not? Or how's that work?
No, technically, right now, all of the complaints about city employee misconduct come to us. So at this point, we had about 250. 206 were related to the police.
Wait, Aaron, that's
Yeah.
citizens complaining about city employees, not city employees complaining about other city employees. That's HR.
That's total.
Okay.
So because of your confusion,
Yep.
we wanted where
Right.
people are complaining about other employees related to like interpersonal interactions. The policy changed, the DHR policy changed that prior to 2018, you came to OMI. Then the policy changed that you went to HR. HR doesn't have trained investigators, so at some point then they would elevate it back to OMI, and it was confusing for the employees. It also takes a different type of skill than the other policy violations. So that's when I've been asking for a DHR investigator, which finally is hopefully coming to the city. But we wanted employees to have a centralized place to go, because not all times does it require a formal investigation where then people are giving statements against one another. Maybe they need a trained mediator, which is going to be that employee relations coordinator that sits down with folks to hash out your issues and see what can be done to manage HR issues.
I guess I was always under the impression if I were to complain about my budget director for some reason, that would be handled by HR, not OMI. And that is not the case.
Depending on the
Depending on the-
nature of the
okay,
investigation,
got it, right.
either HR would handle it, or if it's something different, if you're complaining that maybe you think he's stealing money, that would be, probably come to us. If it's, I don't like the way he talks to me,
I
that
see.
would be an HR issue.
I see. Okay, yeah, it depends on the type of behavior that I'm
The type of misconduct, sorry.
Okay, well, I'll think of some for him, but I have nothing right now, though. So, okay, now that's all I have. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate you being here, and, thanks.
don't think I have any other questions. This was
Okay.
helpful to have you here and to answer some questions. I guess the only thing I could think of was, do you have a macro sense of what might be accounting for the slightly higher number of complaints? And that was against all employees, right? Not a specific subset. You said 206 complaints.
206 complaints were opened against police.
Oh, police, okay.
40 was the combined total of all the other departments. We don't get a lot of those, but we do.
Got it.
I would say people are interacting again. I mean, I think when people were on lockdown for 2 years and police weren't necessarily interacting as much on the streets or in stores or things like that because people weren't out and about during COVID. I mean, it's not a huge increase. It might be like 20 complaints, but I think people are just, getting back to life as normal, which means then you're interacting with other individuals. And I think that accounts for also the issues related with the city. People were teleworking for a couple years, so they weren't necessarily in an office with people either. So now we're coming back to that, and
Well, thank you for the work that you and your team do every day, and I'm glad that you're back at full capacity and civilian-wise, and we're here to support you.
great. Nice
Thank
to meet
you.
you guys.
You too,
Me
Erin.
too.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I won't actually recess it either. We'll change seats once again, and so that the next hearing can be chaired by Councilman Anthony Coghill. Thank you.
Thank you. You going back to your regular seat?
I'll sit a little closer.
You're gonna bring the whole gang up, however you want to do it, Kim.
I can always shuffle down after I introduce you.
Okay, where should I sit?
Right here.
And then how
Yeah,
do
right
we
in the
do
hot
our
seat. Right
presentation?
there, yeah.
Oh, do you
We have a thumb drive. I have it on my computer.
Oh,
I
yeah,
can
that's
email
right.
it.
If you have it on your computer, you can log into the Zoom and you can share your screen on that. Huh? Pardon? To present it? I was gonna say, have Jeff.
Put it in the
print out.
system,
Yeah.
right?
Well, the way we've been doing it.
Just to log into Zoom.
Yeah, just
Do I have a Zoom invite?
Okay, great. I'll give you a minute, to get that. Okay. Hello, I'm Councilman Coghill. Welcome to budget hearing of Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, which I'm happy to chair, and we all know the very important work that you do. We will hear updates from the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. I'd like to invite those from DOME to the table, and if you would just introduce yourselves, and hopefully by the time we're done introducing ourselves, we'll have this hard drive fixed and be ready to go from there. So we will start with you, Director, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. McDevitt for his.
Thank you, and thanks for having us. My name is Kim Lucas, and I'm the Director for the city's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure.
Good afternoon. I am Jeff Scallican. I'm the Deputy Director of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure.
Hi, I'm Evan Gross. I'm the Fiscal and Contracting Supervisor for Mobility and Infrastructure.
Eric Setzler, Chief Engineer.
Angie Martinez, Assistant Director.
Mike Malak, Municipal Traffic Engineer.
Okay, thank you. Peter, do you want to give a brief analysis?
Sure.
I'm sorry, let the record be shown, we've been joined by Councilman Wilson and Councilwoman Gross.
So, the mission of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure is to provide the physical mobility necessary to enable the social and economic mobility of the people of Pittsburgh through the management, design, improvement, and operation of the public rights-of-way. A brief overview: the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure is comprised of 3 bureaus: planning, policy, and permitting, traffic operations, and project design and delivery. For the 2023 operating budget, there's a proposed 114 total full-time employees, which is an increase of 12. The addition of a deputy chief engineer of structures, bridge maintenance supervisor, a construction supervisor, 3 project managers, one call technician, 1 associate project manager, one project engineer going from 4 to 5, 3 additional staff engineers going from 5 to 8, and 1 additional traffic control foreman, second in command, and the reduction of 1 engineering technician, 3. So overall, that's an increase of just over $1 million or 16%.
Okay, you finished?
No.
Okay.
Quick summary of non-personnel changes. There's overall $769,548 added to the non-personnel items. This includes a $950,000 increase to property services, $500,000 for bridge expansion joint replacement is notable in there. And the overall increase is offset by decrease in computer maintenance. As far as capital projects, there are a number of capital projects for the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, including the 28th Street Bridge, the Bridge Preservation and Restoration Fund, bridge upgrades, bus rapid transit, complete streets, design, construction, and inspection services, flex beam, guide rail and fencing, flood control projects, Frankstown Avenue signal improvements, Heron Avenue Bridge, Liberty Avenue, parking lot bridge at Woodruff Street, ramp and public sidewalk, signage and wayfinding, slope failure remediation, the Smithfield Street street resurfacing, Swindell Bridge, trail development, and the West Carson Street Bridge. That's all I have.
Thank you. You got your hands full, don't you, there, Director?
A lot.
Yeah, you got your hands on a lot of things. So you have a brief presentation for us, I understand, correct?
I'll make it
Okay,
brief.
sure, that's great.
It's not super small, but
Yeah,
I will go
that's fine.
very quickly through it. Thank you, Peter, for not only loaning your computer, but also for doing that high-level overview for us. You have noticed that we have a couple new faces this year, so I'm glad we had a chance to introduce ourselves, and I'm glad that for the first time in a long time, we have a fully staffed executive team, and that's not something the
Good.
department was able to say for a long time. So thank you so much. I'm just going to put this into full screen, and we're sharing. Great. So I'll skip over the mission and goals because you covered them for us. To put us into context as a department, DOMI has the 4th largest budget of all city departments in terms of the overall budget. And we have had the largest capital budget allocation, I believe, in previous years. But this year, you will see that we are the 8th largest in terms of our operating budget. The takeaway is that we have a lot of capital dollars that we spend, a lot of projects and assets we're responsible for, but proportionately, the number of staff that we have to achieve those projects is quite small. You may know that we had an audit that was performed this year. The high-level takeaways from the audit, there were 18 recommendations for the department. A solid third of those recommendations were that our department needed to grow in order to continue with the operations that we're responsible for. There were other recommendations pertaining to improving and increasing utility coordination, our paving list development, and also to reestablish the Complete Streets Advisory Group, which you will see we are committing to in 2023. This is an overview of our org chart in yellow. I know it's small. You can see where the growth in the department is. So Peter shared what new positions we will have. You can see that the majority of them are going to our Project Design and Delivery Bureau, which is responsible for maintaining bridges, walls, steps, and new capital construction projects, for example, trails, as well as to our Traffic Operations Bureau, which is responsible for all of our roadway operations, including traffic signals, pavement markings, and signs. A quick reminder for anybody, especially if someone new is tuning in online, but the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure is responsible for all of the assets in our right-of-way. So that means over 1,000 miles of streets, over 40,000 streetlights, almost 1 million street signs, and over 600 signalized intersections. I have to say, I think we have the highest number of assets and responsibilities per capita of any city that I know of. They're beautiful, aren't they? We have nearly 150 city-owned bridges that our department is responsible for, over 800 sets of public steps, hundreds and hundreds of retaining walls that are holding up those steep slopes, and a number of other assets. We're talking a little bit about the accomplishments that we saw this year. This is the tip of the iceberg. You know every single day that my 100 and so people are killing it in terms of what they're producing, but these are some of the high-level excerpts. So we resurfaced 43 miles of streets. This 2023 budget presents one of the largest allocations of capital dollars for paving, so we will hopefully be able to do more streets next year than we were able to do in 22, but we were able to do 43 miles of streets and 11 concrete brick and block stone streets. Over 2,000 signs were repaired, thousands and thousands of new signs installed, and hundreds of miles of paint that we were able to install, whether that was new, complete street designs, or if it was refreshing, because we do maintain all of our assets as well. In terms of major projects from our Project Design and Delivery Bureau, which is led by our Chief Engineer, Eric Setzler, you can see we're working citywide. We've got bridge projects. We've got slope remediation projects. We've got flood projects. This is our work plan. These are projects that we know about, but I will talk in a few moments about the type of work that we've had to address in 2022 that we cannot predict, but that does impact our work plan. I was waiting for a little bit of delay there. In terms of bridge asset management, you know, on January 28th of this year, there was a bridge collapse in our city. That is something that is still under investigation. It is something that, you know, in terms of inspection reports, the city has done everything right. So I can't speak specifically to that, but what I can speak to is the changes we've made since that time. We've been able to increase and improve and modernize, really, the tools that we use to collect and manage those assets. We're working with a contractor to do a deep dive, the report of which came out in October, making sure that every single inspection report for those 150 or so bridges was reviewed and analyzed to see if there were any findings that needed to be readdressed, and there were a few findings, and so that re-inspections have been performed. We have a number of capital projects that I'll talk about in a few moments for next year, but I wanted to touch on some of the more operational things that we've done this year. Traffic signals. We don't often talk a lot about traffic signals, but we have 600 signalized intersections in the city. We have, I think, something around $50 million worth of capital funding through grants and other sources to improve our traffic signals. That not only means better roadways that are operating more efficiently, it means better safety, because we're able to improve timing, and oftentimes, as you can see with our central business district signal projects, we're making pedestrian improvements as well out of concrete and pavement markings. Traffic calming. So this is probably the #1 program that we hear about. It's one of the newest things that our city does, and this is where we install speed humps, speed bumps, speed cushions citywide to bring down the speeds on low volume and low speed residential streets that need to be just a little bit safer. So you can see that this is work that we're doing citywide. And again, traffic calming and safety, we processed almost 500 applications this year. That means members of the public, the residents of the city, reached out to the department, filled out an application, asked us to take a look, and we were able to pull data and review those applications, and we were able to complete 13 projects citywide, including enhanced pedestrian crossings at more than 40 intersections. So often we talk a lot about speed humps, but we're doing safety improvements at every part of our streetscape. Complete streets. So this is making sure, in addition to traffic calming, that we've got opportunities for people to move around our city without their cars. So again, bicycle and safety projects. We completed over 10 miles of those types of projects this year, which is substantial. That is huge. It's bigger than probably any other city you can put us up against in the US. It's magnificent. Not only did we achieve a number of miles of projects, but we also piloted some new types of infrastructure, because we want to make sure that when we're making changes to our streets, that we are using the safest technology that is available today. And that includes sometimes piloting new ways to do that. And our public space and right-of-way management. So I know permits, licenses, and inspections came in front of you probably a few days ago. We are responsible in our department for all of the right-of-way inspections and permitting for the city. So while they do everything that's on private property, we do the complement of everything that's in the right-of-way. That means over 9,000 permits. That means thousands and thousands of inspections with just 9 inspectors citywide. This is an example of something that I'm sure many of us have seen, which is a sidewalk that was closed for reconstruction. It's a good thing, but if it's done so in a way that prevents pedestrians from having safe passage, it's a problem. And so we are increasing our capabilities there with more efficient services and ideally growth in that space in the future. 311s. So I think our department may receive the greatest number of 311s, or at least have the greatest number of service request types. In 2022 to date, we've had over 12,000 311 requests. So remember, our department's about 100 people strong. We're responsible for the literal majority of the capital budget worth of projects, and we also are responding to thousands and thousands of 311 requests. if you enter the city of Pittsburgh, you consume the services of DOMI. I don't know too many other departments that can say that just by physically being here, you're going to use our services. And people have needs, and we strive to meet all of their needs. We manage the bus shelter program for the city, so not only does that mean we're providing new amenities that make transit safer and more accessible, we're also bringing in revenue through that advertising program. Nearly $200,000 this year came in through the bus shelter advertising program for the Street Tree Fund. And street lights. You heard me mention earlier that we have over 40,000 that we're keeping lit every single day. And we received almost 2,000 311s just on streetlights this year for them malfunctioning, and over 100 substantial repairs. We often hear about traffic crashes and traffic safety, and the loss of life is the most concerning element of those. But in reality, we're also losing a lot of our infrastructure. In terms of mobility programs, we're also able to make lives better in our city by providing better resources. So here you see Move PGH touted, where we've increased access to shared services like public transit, like shared bikes and shared scooters. We've seen almost 1 million trips on some of those modes like the scooters, and we've seen $100,000 worth of usage fees on the scooters alone that has been reinvested in the city's infrastructure. For outdoor dining and retail, we formalized the permit this year with the legislation changes. Thank you to the council members who supported that. We have published written guidelines, and we have received 27 new applications citywide for people to repurpose that streetscape in order to better serve their community and their businesses. We think that's a big win for our city and our residents and our businesses. We also produce plans. So the Homewood Mobility Plan means that Homewood is the first neighborhood in the city of Pittsburgh to have a complete sidewalk inventory. That's really important because when we're prioritizing projects, knowing where we have and do not have the appropriate infrastructure is the building block of identifying projects. And our Safe Routes to School program, I believe we are in our 3rd year of Safe Routes to School, and we're growing on previous year's success. We're still working through the PennDOT process for the infrastructure elements, but we've been able to implement wayfinding signs at multiple schools and additional encouragement campaigns like Walk and Roll to School Day. And what I think is one of the most exciting things that we've been able to do this year, which is not physical infrastructure, but it's increasing transparency, and that is the launch of the DOMI map portal. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, any council member, any resident, any employee of the city of Pittsburgh can access really great data that the department, in order to comply with open data requirements and to just improve the lives for everybody involved, we wanted to make available. So traffic calming requests and their statuses, where we've paved for the last 5 years in the city, and status updates on a number of our projects can be found on the DOMI map portal. That's brand new for this year. An emergency response. So I mentioned earlier that we have a work plan. We have hundreds of millions of dollars of projects that we have identified that we want to undertake, but there's a lot of projects that fall in our lap. I'm sure most folks around the table are familiar with the Finland Street pedestrian bridge issue. A couple months ago, a truck drove into it. Within 24 hours, we demolished a bridge because it was structurally unsound. That was not work that was anticipated. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars of capital money that we didn't know we were going to have to spend, and we're not sure when we're going to be able to recoup. Similarly, with a number of traffic signals that go down when people strike them or other emergency work, we are really nimble and able to rise to that, even if that means that it might slow a couple of the other things that we do down. Landslides. These are significant in the city of Pittsburgh with the steep slopes that we have. This is a list of some of the ones that we've worked on this year. Some of them have affected in significant ways residential properties and other. And so it's something that, I believe we heard that there's an increase in our slopes budget this year, or there at least is a slopes budget this year, which is fantastic. And it's work that's going to continue to need to be addressed. So our capital budget in 2023, we're looking at almost $60 million, 48 unique projects. For every single dollar of city money in our budget, there's over $1 of external funding sources. So we're bringing in $1.40 of federal and other types of grants for every single dollar that the city is able to put up. And this year alone, DOMI brought in over $17 million in grant funding to do streetscape projects and other safety improvements, such as the RAISE grant in the Hill District. So we have a number of plans that are going to kick off next year with our Smart Spines project, additional critical sidewalk gaps. We hope to open our traffic management center at 412 Boulevard of the Allies when that building is complete. That will help us respond to emergency changes that are needed for our traffic signals and also just operational improvements. Our LED streetlight conversion, we had to reissue the RFP, but we anticipate award and design to take off in 2023. And this is a very short list of a number of our projects that we're doing next year. So you can see the trolley trail is going to be moving into construction. Bus rapid transit had a groundbreaking and will continue advancing. We have a number of landslide projects and walls and steps and trails and all of the great work that we're doing. We're going to be doing more of it, and we're going to continue to do it citywide. And here, this is, again, one of the behind-the-scenes things. There's so much that touches the public directly. When you've got a sinkhole on your street, or you've got a bridge that you think is causing some concern for your community, people see those every day. But what we don't see is some of the administrative improvements that we're working on. For example, DOMI is responsible for over 10,000 documents. We've got primary sources that we manage with regards to the records for our streets, and we have begun a document retention effort because we do not yet have a document retention policy, being one of the newest city departments, and a digitization effort so that those resources are more accessible for not only our staff, but the public. That should make us be able to do our work more efficiently. And finally, DOMI is not DOMI without the human beings that comprise DOMI. A strong department where people are happy and confident and feel secure in the work that they're doing is what we're trying to achieve. A strong DOMI means a strong city, and so through staff development, and a new focus on training and internal communications, like our newsletter that we have biweekly, we are trying to strengthen ourselves as a department so that we can continue to do the great work for the city and all of the residents.
Thank you, Director. And, thank you for that detailed report. It really highlights what I already know from our biweekly meetings, the enormous responsibility on your office. And that speaks to the staffing levels I know that you're advocating for. But before we get into that, I'm going to go down, well, not down the line, I'm going to go a little bit out of order because I know Councilman Wilson has a engagement, and we'll start with him as far as our members go.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our budget director for putting this together. And thank you for the presentation, Director, and everything you do. So I said one question, but I have two. But I have some compliments first because I really enjoy the work that comes out of your department. I really enjoy working with everyone to get there. And the residents, especially when we fix something that's been affecting them outside their home for so long, it's just such an important moment for them. And I'll just tell you about the one case right now that some of you are familiar with, which is on Rhine Street, that literally there was this groundwater issue that's been happening for so long that ice would come onto the street, or in your language, the right of way, and it would it would pile. It would be 6 inches, and the cars would be and so anyway, you all found a solution, and although it took, something like that takes time, and that's something I've been working on since I've been in office with your department, and it's just so fantastic to see that complete. So appreciate it's small projects like that make huge changes in I think probably 20 households right there. So just on that side. So I appreciate that. Also, all the larger projects, and always interested how we can move funds and all the necessary needs to fix the bridges and all our critical infrastructure. I had one specific question that relates to traffic calming, and real talk, how much money would it take for us to actually tackle all of the issues, all the traffic calming issues, all the traffic calming applications that qualify?
That's a great question, and I don't think that's a number we have off the top of our head. I know that we have the better part of 1,000 applications that we've received. Not all of them qualify, as you know. Some of them speed or other data doesn't, meet our criteria. We are talking with other cities. We've met and with the Department of Public Works to find out how we can, look at ways to use new materials or new processes to try to improve project delivery on those. Mike, I'm not sure if you have anything you want to add, but I know we don't have a number for that.
It's bailing water out of the ocean. It is so difficult. This is the hardest part of my job. And what's so upsetting is that it's not fixing anything that's existing. It's not creating something new. It's addressing driver behavior. And so it's easily the most not aggravating. These projects are great. They make a huge difference. But the fact that we have to even do these in the first place really upsets me. And so the fact that you want to throw that much money, you're right, we should be. It's just disappointing that that's where we're at right now. I have no idea what that number is. There is no number. So, great question. Absolutely.
We've kind of opened the portal on traffic calming, and now everyone wants it. I mean, rightly so, because I think the ones that qualify the most, from what I've seen, is the ones that residents show that their car has been totaled like 3 times, 4 times, because of all the. I'm sure there's other, far more, dangerous situations, but those ones always stand out to me. Where, like, once again, it's like that impact on those, on those streets, the people that live there, and they want like a street that fits into the community. So, all right, so it's going to take, a ton of money, and we're going to keep on getting requests, and we're going to keep on prioritizing which ones should go next. The second question I had, which was, until we get there, what's our communication strategy? Because I know every time the public, like even I have this one out on Terman Avenue, and they're requesting, now they're requesting, for another meeting about it. And I always want to be mindful of getting everyone in the room so we can hash it out. So this is a project that, we had trouble finding a contractor. That's understandable, but it's going to, whether it's this one or the next one. And I know whenever typically I make the request, it's the answer is right on, which is like, well, that's gonna, the more meetings that we do to explain, what we do, it's gonna pull down other projects, and I totally get that. I'm just always asking the question of like, how can your department be supported on communication better?
That's a great question. So this year, for the first time, we had a communication specialist. We had 50% of a communication specialist whose time is divided with the Department of Public Works. For next year, we're going back to having no communication specialist at all.
Who was the communication specialist?
Emily Bourne.
Okay.
And she's moving into the mayor's office. They're organizing around communication specifically. So while we're losing an individual, we hope to be gaining capacity because there's going to be a focus within the mayor's office to communicate on behalf of the department. We've relied on heavily this year constituent services, neighborhood services, and we are so grateful. We are so grateful for that group because they are dedicated to going out and being a part of communities and attending all of the community meetings, helping us organize our meetings to talk about our work, and being there when we can't. And my understanding is that what is shown in the budget for next year is a dedicated infrastructure person for that group, because as soon as you said, what did you say? Open up the portal. As soon as you really start to poke and see the ways that we can increase communication with the public around our projects, you realize DOMI, again, every single person physically in the city of Pittsburgh is experiencing our services. We need that resource. So they will have a dedicated resource that's going to be working on behalf of these projects. We also hope to improve the public's awareness through things like that map portal. On the map portal page today, you can go and you can see all of the traffic calming requests we've received, and you can see the statuses on them. And if a request was received and we collected data and fortunately for the community, if their speed and crash data don't show that it meets our criteria, that's great because they live on a street that doesn't have speed and crash data that meets the criteria. But people can go and find out better information. What my goal is and what our department's goal is increasing the resources like that are available. I understand your question is about nuts and bolts and really getting down to the details of projects when they've been adopted. But for the other 300,000 people, this is an opportunity for them to get information too, 24 hours a day, right at home.
All right, so a dedicated infrastructure person at the mayor's office.
That is my understanding. That's what's proposed.
And, okay. I'll follow up with them. Okay, that's good to hear. All right, well, the only thing I was going to add about that was that the person that you mentioned wasn't, sometimes the community, like, they want to talk to the engineer. And so then, like, I know, and, is there any way to set someone up or to, I'm not sure if that hire is already made, but have someone who is hired that is, I don't know how to explain, I want to know the best person, the qualifications, but at least someone that's going to know, some aspect of all the ins and outs of what an engineer would do to look at a project and I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it, but
I know the technical
yeah. So the meetings I've had
considerations.
is always with like the traffic engineer. They come to the meeting, and so I just know that the community is always going to be hungry for that. And it would be expensive to have two traffic engineers. One's a communication person, and one's a But anyway, that said, I'm looking to support the best approach in that area. So thanks. All right, no further questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Wilson. We'll go, I know Councilwoman Strasburg has no time constraints. Do you, Councilwoman Gross? Okay. We have Councilman Lavelle, for the record, has joined us online. And Councilman Lavelle, I'll just go to you right now, if that's okay, if you have any questions. Do you hear me?
I can't hear you, but I'm also in another meeting, so I'm just listening in at the moment. But thank you.
Okay, so you have no questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go to Councilwoman Strasburger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you for your presentation, and thanks for the work that you do every single day. Yeah, I was just reflecting as you were saying that you can't enter the city of Pittsburgh without experiencing the work, the product of the work that you do, whether it's new build or maintenance. That it's also a lot like how I think about, how we touch the lives of people on a daily basis in local government, right? Like, we're arguably at maybe one of our lowest trust points in democracy and in government in American history right now. And what can we do to restore our faith in government? Well, it is, tackling the small things that touch their daily lives. And sometimes they're not so small. Sometimes it's, making sure that we have confidence in our bridges, right? So I think that the work that you do goes beyond just the sum of its parts, but it actually can help to restore faith in government, especially local government. So thank you for the work you do day in and day out, which I know is a challenge given the amount of work that's put before you with the capacity that you have. And that's, I guess, what I want to direct my first question to. I'm glad to see that there are increases across the board, especially in sort of the management, upper management levels, and I don't know, you can call them something different, but do you have confidence that we'll be able to fill those positions? Do you think it's sufficient to be able to accomplish the work that we have in front of you? I mean, you brought in, $17 million in grants in 2022. You said for every dollar the city contributes, you brought in about $1.40. Right? Like, there's a lot of work to do, big and small, communications, maintenance, landslide, and then emergencies, right? Like, what do you think that we are approaching a point where we can tackle that all, or where are we right now in your assessment?
So The District of Columbia is something like 66 square miles, and Pittsburgh is in, I believe, the upper 50s in terms of square miles, so geographically about the same size. Their Department of Transportation is 10 times the size of Domi, and they're not dealing with things like landslide remediation, and they don't own, I believe, the number of bridges that our department and our city owns. So no, we are nowhere near the staffing levels, nor the compensation levels that we need to be competitive. The job market is tough for everybody right now, but I can tell you we've got positions we've posted with 0 candidates. In other cases, we've got positions where, maybe we got a candidate and a great candidate, but 1,600 people clicked on the job because they were curious about the title. They were interested in maybe working for us, but something led them to not apply. And I think the combination of residency, which I'm not advocating for or against residency requirements, but what that means is that we have 300,000 people and only so many engineers that live within the city of Pittsburgh. And when you add to that, I've heard from some people in the local market that said to work for the city, they would have to take a $50,000 pay cut to work in some of our, especially our upper level engineer positions that are so vastly critical to our city's infrastructure. Some of those folks said, I would take a $25,000 pay cut because I know it's public service and I love Pittsburgh and I want to contribute to Pittsburgh. But when we're talking about equity, when we're talking about people, maybe they have student loans, maybe they don't have that generational wealth. You're talking about people who can't afford to work for below market value, even in the local market. And so absolutely, if I had a magic wand, that's where I would invest, would be in the folks here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In the salaries to be able to retain and attract new talent.
Absolutely. Yeah. As I mentioned, we have 2 new faces sitting at the table. When we were here last year, we had, I think, 1 vacancy and shortly thereafter another one. The municipal traffic engineer position has turned over 4 times in the 3 years that I've been here. And I'm so grateful to Mike for the times you've acted in the past and for not wanting to be, but listening to my begs and pleas to step into the role permanently. We're required by state code to have a municipal traffic engineer. Mm-hmm. That position has turned over 4 times. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that we're a place that people want to stay.
Mm-hmm. And I know that position is not without stress. I mean, the sleepless nights you must have when the liability is kind of falling on your shoulders for decisions that you're making. I know that that's an important and critical, and they didn't realize it was state mandated. So, Okay, so point taken on that, and I want to be able to work collectively with my counterparts here to ameliorate that and actually have the staffing levels that we need and that we deserve, that the city deserves, that the residents of the city deserve to have to be able to accomplish what's needed to be accomplished. So, moving on just a little bit. And this is a question, let's see here. We've already tackled communication. I'm glad to hear that we've talked about that, and that was one of my questions here. This is a question that I will give full credit to our council member-elect, Barb Warwick, for sort of talking through with me, and I think it's an interesting idea. Since she will be voting on the final budget, I want to make sure her voice is coming through here and that this question is being asked. But it's regarding traffic calming. Right now, I know we're doing it in sort of a reactive way upon request, which is, I'm guessing, out of because of capacity issues, right? You request it, we will look at it, we will make an assessment, we'll prioritize. Do you think it's possible with greater capacity in the future to be able to move toward a more proactive traffic calming approach where, say, whether it's the street is opened up by a utility, PWSA, People's Gas, or there's a repaving program, that every single street that's maybe beyond a tertiary street could be assessed for its potential for traffic calming, and even if it's paint, even if it's zigzag paints near the JCC, right? There could be some investment, assuming that every street can benefit from traffic calming.
The short answer is yes. The short answer is, the medium answer is that Absolutely. Looking at ways, especially through our paving program, which we do today, part of the analysis in selecting streets for resurfacing is, do we have a complete streets project there? Do we have some other projects that are happening in that same location so that we're painting once, we're digging once? So absolutely, proactive is critical. We know that today, if you pull the data, some communities have 0 requests via 311, and other communities literally have 500. I've pulled that data myself. So we know that we're not hearing from everybody, and we're certainly not always hearing from the communities that might need it most. I do want to draw attention to a couple of the plans that we've published in the last couple years at DOMI. We have our pedestrian safety action plan. So that is identifying high risk and high need parts of the city. Brownsville Road was one of those. I believe Liberty Avenue and a number of others that we do have funding in the pipeline for. That is proactive. That is looking at data and saying, let's rank the places that need our investment the most. We have the Bike Plus Master Plan. It's a 10-year plan that shows 120 miles of improved on-street connections. And a lot of those are neighborways that don't include bike lanes. They just include safety improvements like better crosswalks and a little bit of traffic calming. So I point to those to identify and show that we've got plans and we have proactively identified a number of elements, and also to say that traffic calming isn't the end all be all of safe streets. It is one part of our portfolio of ways that we improve safety. It's the most popular one because it's kind of the straightforward, I see a speed hump, I know that's to slow people down, but we do a lot of other work, including our signal work and some of these other plans type of work that slows people down too. And so we use all those elements.
And I also recognize that engineering alone can't do all the work. I mean, when I say engineering, I mean the work that you all do, right? Like, I've come to this slowly over the years, but enforcement has to be a part of it. And the more that we can move toward non-human to human interaction enforcement, the better. And I know that that's going to take lobbying our state elected officials to make changes there. And I'm in there for the fight, and I'm ready for that. But it's going to take more than I think what even DOMI is able to do as well. So I wanted to recognize that and reassert my commitment to that tenet as well. My last question is, we've seen such a growth, as you've mentioned, I forget the number of miles that you actually named, but a growth in sort of our, whether it's a neighborway, whether it's a bike part of the Bike Plus plan, whether it is traffic calming, the number of miles that you have covered over the last few years is impressive. And what I would think of as a temporary measure, right? Flex posts, I wouldn't think would be intended to be as permanent as maybe a curb, say, for a protected bike lane, just as an example. I think they're a wonderful way to test a certain intervention on a street, right? That's what I've heard from you all, and to make sure that we're not investing lots and lots of money on concrete interventions when we're not certain of a certain intervention on a certain street. But that said, there's a growing appetite for conversion of some of those more temporary measures into permanent. Like, I would say the Penn Avenue bike lane downtown, one of the first that we had. How do we create a map like the ones in the portal that you shared? I'm very excited about exploring that. Just as a quick aside, I know at PWSA, I know at other places where people then have access to those maps and those types of resources, they feel more empowered. It's easier for us and our staff to be able to point people to, and I think it would actually be a great idea to create a briefing for council staff and introduce them to all of those maps so that they can be familiar with it. And considering that there are 5 of us here today, but maybe more should be aware of those portal maps. But anyway, if someone could look at, say, a map that shows that the number of what I'm just going to refer to as temporary measures, and where they fall in the list of, a 5-year plan to convert to more permanent. So that, again, restoring trust in government. When I tell someone, well, I know you don't love the look of the flex post, there is a possibility that we could move towards, say, planted bump outs or something like that, as opposed to flex posts. It's going to take a capital investment. It's going to happen in 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever the years are.
Yeah, I love what you're asking, and that's an analysis that we don't have on the shelf yet. I will say that when faced with the choice of having more miles of safe improvements versus having slightly more permanent of the existing miles, I'm going to vote for safety every time. But you're right. In the 2023 budget, there's $150,000 proposed to make Penn Avenue specifically more permanent. Not only do the materials cost more, the engineering costs more because drainage then becomes impacted when paint and flex posts don't have that impact. So noted. Something for us to think about. We are taking steps in that direction, beginning with Penn Avenue next year. And we're always going to rule for safety. And sometimes concrete is safer.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear that Penn Avenue's on the list for next year, and that we'll continue this conversation in that regard. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Strasburger. With that, we'll move on. I'm sure you have some questions, Councilwoman Gross.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everybody, for being here for your presentation. Would you mind emailing us the presentation? Like, we try to look, it's awkward for us to look at it on the screens. We're in a chamber and we're not, sure. You can, other departments, if you're listening, bring handouts that we can refer back to our presentations. So I have also a couple of questions that from other members who are either Councilwoman-elect Borwick, who's waiting to be sworn in, also Councilwoman Smith, who's out today. We were all kind of sharing some ideas. And one of them, I think, kind of dovetails with other members' questions, which is we have, I think, the director mentioned kind of DOMI-driven plans versus the neighborhood requests that come in often through council offices or community meetings that council members have been working on with community groups. And how do those jibe in a way, right? I mean, so I'll say out loud that a lot of my neighborhood's requests did not make it into the mayor's 2023 proposed capital budget. And before it gets to you even, it kind of goes through a capital committee that council created well before I was on council, and I've often been not very happy about the capital committee for this reason, right? And so, but where are we, right? What we don't want to happen is that the neighborhood groups feel disempowered. They do a lot of really good work in organizing to create consensus on the ground, to work with their elected officials, and then also to work with city departments. But sometimes you get into this really awkward negotiating where no one's really clear who they should be talking to. And so it's dissatisfying. It's dissatisfying. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of speak to that, because I think it was a little bit of what you said earlier.
Sure. So there's a couple different things there. The planning efforts are, we don't plan at our desks behind closed doors. The Bike Plus Master Plan, I think, was under development for something like 5 years, and that originated, I'm sure Angie, who's been with the city almost longer than anybody else on the DOMI side. Well, fine. Evan's here forever. But that was based in the information gleaned from community meetings. I know we hosted 7 in-person meetings when we had the draft Bike Plus plan, because I personally attended many of them. So they're plans that are done with the community. A lot of our projects also originate in Department of City Planning plans, which, by definition are community plans that then get passed on to DOMI to take to the next level of design and engineering. And so none of that's happening behind closed doors. In terms of the budgeting process, you're right, and we can't speak too much to that because it's outside of our hands. What we can say is that we presented a very long list of needs, and how many millions of dollars worth of asks, Evan?
Over 100, I think.
So we got, less than half of that, and those were just of the things that we know. Every second of every day, our infrastructure is degrading. Every single second. Even though we were able to resurface 43 miles of streets this year, the average condition of our streets will be lower next year than it was this year. We just don't have the resources at this moment to increase some of those conditions. And so I say that in that there are a lot more needs than are able to get funded, and by trying to have the most equitable process within the department, which is what we can control. We can't control what happens after we submit our request, but we look at things like, if we're looking at traffic calming type projects, we're looking at crash data, speed data if we have it, presence in another plan, presence, everything. We have an equity index that looks at things to identify communities that have experienced economic and mobility hardship, and those get a score too in our project. So internally, we're looking at all of that type of criteria. Being in a community plan or requests that we've received from council members or from members of the community also receives a weight and a point value. And so we take those considerations, all the 311 requests, all of that's in consideration. But once it leaves our hands, we don't have any control over it.
So that's new money. So just a reminder to the listening public, the 2023 proposed capital budget is additive for capital projects, right? And so just as a reminder, Pete's kind of giving me an eye. Director, do you want to say something? So in my mind, I'll finish my thought, right? Like the projects that were budgeted in 2022 and 2021 aren't erased by the 2023 capital budget. And that's what I mean by additive.
Yes, you're absolutely correct there. Some of them are still ongoing that are planned to be funded in future years, but you're absolutely correct.
Right, so that's what I want people to not panic about, because I actually literally have received text from constituents who are sophisticated constituents who really understand this budgeting, but sometimes you forget, right? Just because you don't see it in 2023's capital budget doesn't mean that your community project that you worked so hard on, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and then finally got into the 2022 capital budget has not been erased by the 2023 capital budget. So I want everyone to understand that. And then also, as we move forward, this isn't the last bite at the 2023 capital budget. So we'll pass it in balanced form. But I'm officially saying here at the table that I'm going to be working with you as a department to amend some of the projects that aren't funded for 2023, right? Whether I'm going back into previous capital years, there are projects that I feel are enough of an urgency that I'll be fighting to get the votes to appropriate the appropriate money for it. So I'm just going to saying that out loud, and all members do that, right? And we do that all year long. So again, just as a reminder to the public that our capital budget basically is always open, and the previous iterations are still there. So it's lots more projects are ongoing or going to happen. It's a longer list than what you see in the 2023 document in front of us.
So there's 53 million, I think, proposed for next year, and we have about 200 million in projects that we're responsible for.
Yes.
So, and I've neglected to mention this earlier, but we've approved payment for $50 million worth of work this year. So we are spending that money. Municipal finance, I don't know, anybody's got their head completely around it because it's so fluid sometimes. But we are spending tens of millions of dollars. Some of the stuff that you see next year and the year after, it's already committed from a previous year's project because our years, the nature of our work, multi-year, multi-phase, multi-source. And so oftentimes what I'm sure if somebody from OMB was sitting here, they would say is that so much of next year's bond money is already consumed because we've got obligations from last year's grant, for example. But you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. And especially when emergency work comes online, we are forced to cannibalize because we only have access to money within our department.
I was personally forced to cannibalize from other of my neighborhood projects, which I was not very happy about because, again, it was emergency infrastructure work. It wasn't really district-specific projects, really, right? And so when a set of city steps falls down, not the bridge, which is a much even bigger project, but smaller city steps that were really integral part of the mobility rights of way for a city neighborhood, and I have to take from another neighborhood's park project to replace critical right-of-way infrastructure is, that's definitely is what we don't want to be doing, and we had to do this year.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
The other thing to note for community groups is if the request is under $50,000, it does not get carved out as its own line item. So it could be rolled into the traffic calming program.
Yeah.
So that's also for them not to get dissatisfied or not feel like anything's happening, but the way the budget's set up is the project has to be over the $50,000 threshold to make its own line item.
Right, so don't panic out there if you've got a project that's less than $50,000. We're gonna follow through to try to make them happen. So a related question that I've asked before and other members are asking is, I think Councilwoman Strasburg touched on it as well. there are things that we didn't used to do that we do now, like the flex posts, like the speed humps, like thermoplastic paint, that when we started doing them, and this is true of lots and lots of departments and things, that we subcontract for them. But once we start doing them at scale, it's actually less efficient and less cost efficient for us to be subcontracting out. And that's where you get a lot of lack of deliverables to a neighborhood over something like some thermoplastic paint, because they missed the bid for this year and the contract's already executed, and now they got to wait a whole 12 months, and it's just some paint, right? Or it's just some flex posts. So can you speak to, like, well, what is the threshold that, the volume of activity that we need to do? And it's not just this department. I've asked this at PwC, the same kind of thing. If we're rebuilding the city, right, why are we using so many subcontractors? We should have the capacities in-house. And you know what? I'll just throw one more on top of that, because I've said it about hydrologists and soil engineers. We sub out millions of dollars at this point. We continue to have more and more landslides. That is not what you use consultants for. Sorry, I went on a rant. I was trying to frame it as a question.
It's not Jeopardy. You won't be penalized for it not being a question. No, and also not only is it costly, it's also time cost. So Terman Avenue that Councilmember Wilson brought up was postponed to next year because the contractor told us they couldn't fit it into their schedule this year. So we have lack of control over, and that's not the first or last project where that's been the case. So we, my understanding is that the Department of Public Works is increasing their labor in-house by many people. And so I do hope that there's an opportunity for some of our asphalt-related work to maybe be able to use their crews to do some of that work. Those are conversations that Director Hornstein and I have started, because we agree.
Talking about speed humps specifically for the asphalt?
That's what,
yes. I just wanted to make sure we highlighted that, because Councilwoman Smith wanted me to make sure that was highlighted. So how far along, how close are you to maybe doing it in-house?
It's up to a different department to say yes, but I think he understands, Director Hornstein, I believe, understands that makes a lot of sense. And in my mind, filling a pothole is like an inverse speed hump, so it seems like it should be within a skill set. However, just because there's new people, and as all the engineers laugh at me because they're like, him, oh my goodness, that is not at all accurate. But the reality is, even if you add a bunch of people, they're not going to be here on January 2nd. It's going to take time to staff up. So even if we are able to make great steps and strides next year towards bringing more services in-house, which absolutely I'm advocating for day in, day out, especially when it comes to my professional staff, we pay 3 times an hourly rate to get a professional engineer to supplement on our projects. And we don't have control over who those folks are. We don't have control if their companies are switching them around to a different project and they disappear the next day off of our contract. And so across the board, we feel that desire to have more capabilities in-house. We have ramped up the amount of thermoplastic work that we do in-house. We have made great strides in what our pavement marking and signage shop is able to do. And we'll continue to look to ways to increase that.
Could I add a little
Please,
something?
Eric.
So for bridges specifically, which are of course an important topic this year, we have not really had any in-house capacity for quite a number of years for maintenance or small repairs of bridges. And
where we take off the tree down.
Councilman Lavelle, you need to put yourself on mute.
So, as you said, we know that it's more expensive to use contractors. There's a lot of coordination, invoice payment, all those kinds of things that go into that. We are taking steps to start to build capacity to do bridge maintenance in-house. The proposed budget has a bridge maintenance supervisor, which was the first step in this, hiring a person to start putting together a team. There are not, like the blue collar positions are not in the budget yet. I think the idea is that we are working with WSP on the review of our bridge program. They're helping us put together a comprehensive bridge asset management program, and staffing recommendations are going to be part of that. So, I'm really excited that we're taking the first step this year, and then, I expect there'll be more maybe throughout next year or in the following year's budget to try to build that in-house capacity, which will allow us to get more done quicker and at a lower cost.
Great, and so it really speaks to why sometimes, when there's a request that's coming from, again, this is a little bit neighborhood driven versus the department, but then also sometimes there's literally just no way of if we had the capacity in-house, we would be able to immediately satisfy requests that we can't because they've got to wait through some long cycle. And so I just wanted to kind of reiterate that because it's something that it's consternating to the public. We had a short set of steps, right? I don't know exactly, I'm going to say 20 risers or so, that it was so great to be able to call the carpentry division because they were wooden and not have to go through like 2 years of studies, not have to try to get a big capital request, not have to wait I'm still waiting. I've been waiting for years for some concrete precast steps, years on specific steps. And oh man, carpentry showed up like the next day. It was great. So, all the steps used to be wood. I don't know. It's just a thought. So there's they don't last as long, but you can actually do them. So there's maybe some cost and benefit there. I want to kind of throw in a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, just a different topic, but this is still one of those things that's kind of like people ask and then we all kind of get to an understanding and then we forget, or there's new residents or new questions. Why are our bus stops so bad, and what do you have control over and what do you not?
That's a great question. So there are thousands of bus stops citywide in the city of Pittsburgh. Bus stops are often not just bus stops. They're typically using sidewalk space, which, as we know, is the responsibility of the adjacent property owner, or there's some other sort of location. So we have requested in the past couple budgets for money specifically to enhance our bus stops. We have some mobility, congestion mitigation, and air quality money that's going to come online in the next couple years for mobility hubs, which a mobility hub is the co-location of things like public transit and shared scooters or shared bikes or some other mode. So the answer is that there's a lot of bus stops. It's not space that we typically are constructing in because it's the right-of-way, but it could be a sidewalk within the right-of-way. We are investing in them, but probably not at the scale that anybody would really want to see.
And then also those bus shelters that might be near you or that you see may not be they're definitely not under dummy control.
So, and I'm now looking for my slide on it. We do manage the bus shelter advertising contract. So that is 200 plus shelters citywide, certainly not all the shelters citywide. And some of that contract goes towards replacing PRT, which is the Port Authority's new name, replacing their shelters with our new ones. The reality is that the volume of stops that exist compared to the resources available to enhance them is not great. But what we did in the last year, which we hadn't done as a city previously, is developed an equity index for our bus stops so that when we are able to identify funding to improve a transit stop, because when you improve a transit stop, you make it easier and more accessible to use, and that means people have greater independence, so it's important and it's safer. We now have a better matrix to identify which stops should get invested in.
So maybe
first.
we'll dig up those constituent requests and kind of top them off for you, so that we kind of get them, reevaluated since it's been a while and you've got a new matrix.
And just I found the numbers. So this year we replaced 6 shelters, we installed 3 new bus shelters, and we processed over 2,500 maintenance requests for the existing bus shelters. So a lot of volume of work that's done through that program for half of a person managing it.
That's amazing. Thank you. Because it is, like you said, it's part of our city goals, right? We want to make sure that people are able to move around the city even if they don't own a car. And then the last thing I never like to leave a budget hearing without asking about is utility coordination. Now, this is a painful, ongoing, complex topic, but we are, every year that I've been here, really rebuilding more infrastructure than we were the year before. And that includes underground infrastructure. And you are the department that has the jurisdiction for all permitting in the right-of-way. And so, how can we do better? We can definitely do a lot better. But how do we get there?
I'm sure my assistant director, Angie Martinez, has some thoughts, so I'll let her chime in a moment. One thing that we're doing, and I've spoken with some other council members about this, is with PWSA, who is maybe the largest entity that we coordinate with. We've started the very beginning baby steps towards getting a master agreement with them. We have a couple older documents that stipulate how we work together, but they're not robust. And both entities have identified a need to say when there are shared situations like landslides where there's evidence of broken water infrastructure or sinkholes or paving list, there's opportunities for us to really formalize how we work together. So at the very highest level, we are working on charting out how we want to work together in the future. Angie, I'm not sure if you have anything you'd like to add about on the day-to-day coordination, some of the improvements we've made.
Yeah, I definitely want to reiterate that it is striving for better. There has been an increase in work. I just pulled up my permit count here. Almost 50% of our right-of-way permits are opening permits. So that's when a utility company is coming in and they're cutting open the street. Some of that work, they plan ahead, but some of, just like DOMI has unplanned work, utilities and those systems can also have emergency breaks and others that need to, require immediate attention. So it's always chasing a moving target. I can say some of the things we've done in the recent years that I'm particularly proud of is moving our permitting system into one-stop PGH. And I think so there's an online permit system. And we've done better in integrating, I think, our traffic review. So the entity that regulates the utilities is the PUC, the Public Utility Commission. DOMI is responsible for organizing the schedules of work that we can schedule and requiring, notice and proper traffic control. And so that's where I think we've tried to be really focused is in making sure that we can create, places for, different service providers can come together to discuss their planned work and even their unplanned work, which then can, require other providers to have to move things around. So creating those conversations and, like I said, places to touch base. But also, in that traffic obstruction map, for instance, that Kim pointed to in the DOMI portal, I think it's really important to recognize that making sure safe work zones are safe is a really important part of DOMI's responsibility in terms of utility coordination.
A couple other quick highlights from this year. We published our update to the right-of-way manual, which increases the expectations and requirements for those folks who are opening up our street. As soon as you cut into a street, you're degrading the street. And so making sure that the restoration of that street is complete and comprehensive. And we met with utility companies after that because, as you can imagine, increasing expectations means increased costs for folks doing work. And we adjusted some of those requirements. We've had great dialogue with these companies, with the gas companies, with PWSA, and we are open to adjusting when it's going to make their jobs better, and therefore, in return, the residents have a better experience. We hosted our first paving summit this year, where we brought together those utility companies and introduced our paving list and brought them into the room and said, do you have questions? How do you feel about this process? Do you have anything that you want us to know? And finally, shown in the proposed budget is the addition of a one-call technician. So again, PUC is who's regulating the utilities. We own a ton of infrastructure, you may have heard, including underground infrastructure. And so by increasing our capabilities within the department to mark that underground infrastructure, we're being more responsive to those utility companies and decreasing costs to the city in terms of fines.
I'm just going to clarify, and then I think I'm finished with my questions, but when your street hasn't been paved for 45 years, and then People's Gas comes and tears it all up and replaces the gas lines and then repaves, and then 2 years later PWSA comes up and opens it all completely back again to replace the 8-inch water line distribution and then repaves. It's not just the standard of pavement that we're holding them to. We've now, probably paid for that street two, possibly even 3 times, right? There are literally streets that we didn't get to for 40 years that finally the city paved, and then immediately a utility opened them up, right? It took 12 years for the city to come up with the match money for Penn Avenue Phase 1. It held that entire street in blight from 2000 until 2012. because we didn't have the money for even the 10% match. Finally came up with the money. PennDOT finally opens up all of Penn Avenue, right, in Bloomfield, Garfield, tears up the old trolley tracks, lays a brand new concrete street that should last for, what is that? How long does that concrete street last? Engineers?
Get to our structural engineer over here.
40, 50 years or more.
40, 50 years, whereas an asphalt street lasts 10 years, right? What happens? PwC cuts into it to replace water service lines just a few years later, right? Saws right through that concrete. You know, citizens can see that, and they've paid for it twice now, right? And so what I'm hearing is that you keep saying PUC is the entity that regulates those utilities. So we have no authority?
I wouldn't say we have no authority. So within city code, it requires that service providers provide to us their planned scheduled work, and we get that from our service providers, and we meet with them regularly on, an annual basis to review those lists, and then it's always chasing a moving target. And I can understand the perception of, and the frustration that comes with seeing a road cut into multiple times. I do think that a lot of it comes down to convening all of these service providers again together and sort of having DOMI take the lead because pavement preservation is important to us, because we set the restoration standards, we can lead with our paving list, and we have other sort of levers, pricing of right-of-way permits, I think that we can use to compel more collaboration in those spaces, but it is definitely herding cats because everybody is providing.
It's bankrupting us.
Yeah.
50% of PwC, we bring it down somewhat, but 50% of the utility replacement cost is street reconstruction. So you have $100 million, you're spending $50 million on refilling those pits and repaving to standard. So, but we're paying for that. It's not like a different pot of money. The citizen is paying the water bill, the citizen is paying the gas bill, and the citizen is paying the property tax bill. So to whatever extent we can do that coordination so that street is open once, we can do 3 times as many miles of street and infrastructure underneath. I don't think I'm overstating that.
I will say,
but these aren't maintenance projects, and they're not even emergency projects. These are 100-year projects. Most of those 8-inch water mains that are being replaced are like over 100 years old. Now, they're only supposed to be 70 years old, but we're doing it once every 100 years. This is it. This is the time. Sorry.
I think, we're working on phase 2 of Penn Avenue right now, and just recently had a utility meeting. And we are talking to the gas company and the water company to say, hey, we're doing complete reconstruction. Like, get in there ahead of time and replace your mains, because now is the time to do it. It'll also save you money because you won't have to fully restore the street, because we're going to be doing it anyway. So that coordination is really important. And we have confirmation from the gas company they're going to do it. We're still working on confirming that PwC is going to do it. We agree. I drive Penn Avenue a lot, and it was painful to watch that concrete get cut up. We want to make sure that we're providing that opportunity. I'm not sure if we can force them to take advantage of it, but Penn Avenue Phase 2, I think we're going to be successful on that. The BRT is another example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Uptown is a big mess right now if you've been through it, but that's because they're taking the advantage to get in there and replace those lines. So we're really happy about that happening.
We could actually stay here all day and talk about it. So, Mr. Chair, I won't keep beating that drum, but, Councilwoman Strasburger, if you want to pick up on anything you can do at PwC for Penn Avenue Phase 2, it sounds like that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Councilman Lavelle, if you're still with us or not. Do you see that, Peter? Yeah. So if you have any questions, Councilman Lavelle, now would be the time. I'll take that as a no. If he wants to join in, he could join in, but I'll just sum up. I don't really have a whole lot of questions because, you're very thorough. We meet on every other week, and, I feel like I just sat through the last 40 of our meetings through this
Sorry.
last 2 hours. No, that's okay. It's okay. It's good. But just a couple things, as the Councilwoman Gross was saying about tearing the streets up. I thought that if PWSA comes in and if we resurface the street and PWSA comes in and has to replace their line, they're now responsible for replacing that street, correct?
They are. There are restoration requirements. We also have a moratorium on our streets, and I don't know, Eric or Angie, if either of you wants to chime in on that. But we do say, by the way, if we've resurfaced the street and you go in and you cut it up, you are responsible for, I believe, greater restoration requirements than our right-of-way manual would have required.
Right. So, for instance, Eric, on Penn Avenue, as painful as that is, and I understand that, but we're not footing that bill.
We, the city's not, but I think to the councilman's.
The citizens are.
Yeah, okay.
Right, because
okay,
because I pay taxes and I pay a water bill.
I understand that, right.
But we're not, no. Domi's not funding that. The city's not funding that. It's
Yeah,
just
the
it's a missed
authority is.
opportunity. Yeah.
And I get it. It's all taxpayer money. But I just want to be clear that they are responsible, whether it's an asphalt street, if it's Columbia Gas, and they have to come in, they're responsible.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Good. Okay, so, and it's good that you're proactive. And again, if I were in that business and you gave me the opportunity to get in there and replace those lines, providing they were aging, certainly you should do that at the time. Okay, here's what I want to ask you. Obviously, the responsibilities you have, I'm always amazed as to, you've got enormous responsibilities, whether we're talking about retaining walls, we're talking about bridges, roads, signage, we can go on and on. Let me ask you this. You either need more staff, it's pretty evident to me, or you need to lose responsibility. So my question is this. If you were to lose some responsibility, what would you take out that consumes time, money, labor, things of that nature?
The great news is communications. It's public engagement. It's the sort of constituent services side. We've heard from the new administration that they believe that is really the function of the administration, and we have very much benefited from having a lot of that responsibility. As you heard Councilmember Wilson say today, everybody wants an engineer to show up at their meeting. That's simply not possible. But by seeing that capacity and that portfolio move into another part of the city has been really great, because it's freed up our folks at least a little bit to spend more time designing, managing contracts, managing procurement, and that sort of work.
Yeah, good. And we talked a little bit about your staffing level. I know there was the need for a bridge maintenance supervisor. Have we hired one? Have we found one?
So that's in next year's budget.
That's next year's budget.
So we don't have that position yet.
Right.
I have some concerns about recruitment just based on some of the data I shared earlier about the experience levels of people that are willing to work for the compensation levels that we're able to offer. But we're grateful that it's in the budget.
Right. And, when you talk about residency, I was not for the police, the firefighters. To me, they should live within the city limits. It's our taxpayer base kind of leaving the city, and they're working here, and their salaries are dependent on our taxpayer dollars. However, in your case, when we're looking for engineers, I do believe that there should be, whether it's the amount of employees that you have or the qualification of that job that you're requesting, should be lifted in some degree, because it's going to be hard for you to attract talent as far as, bridge maintenance supervisors, engineers, things of that nature. So that's a challenge for you, is it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And retaining folks that we have. I hear from my staff that want to be able to own a home, who have children, and they say, I can't afford to live in the city. And what we have within our purview is cannibalizing positions so that we can try to find some salary to make adjustments, but that doesn't go very far. And as you've already stated, we need more people, not fewer people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you need to pay them more.
Absolutely. We need our compensation to be competitive in the market. Sure. We're managing $200 million worth of projects. That doesn't even touch on all of the maintenance and operations and safety work that we do on a daily basis.
Okay. I had a sign hit by a car out in front of my house. It was a pedestrian crossing sign. I didn't report it. I removed it. I meant to report it, but I didn't report it. Does somebody have to report that in order for that to be
311.
Okay.
Please use 311 if you ever see a sign that's down, and that will go to the correct shop.
Right. Okay.
Is it still down, council member?
No, it's back up. So I was.
Someone else must have reported
Somebody
it.
must have
Thankfully,
reported
they
it.
did their civic duty.
Yeah. You were actually there, Councilwoman Gross, when that sign was mowed down. It was bing, remember? so no, somebody put it back up. I was like, that's great. I was glad to see that. I actually have a meeting in a little bit across the street of a gentleman who wants to show me a brand new technology of road surfacing. Okay, I don't know what the composite is. I don't know what the material is. I'm going to find that out when I go over there. Do you look at things like that, or is that something you don't even think about?
No, we're absolutely interested in something like that. You know, we, much to Councilmember Gross's conversation and questions earlier about bringing capacity in-house, we don't produce asphalt. You know, we have a contract that we compete. This year it is being recompeted, I believe. And so, sorry? Absolutely not. And especially with inflation, you know, that, Evan, $300,000 increase in our paving costs, I think, just due to inflation. So $300,000 less money that we could put into miles, that was just gobbled up by inflation. But we're absolutely interested in better technologies.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll let you know when I find out. I'm sure it's very expensive, but I don't know that for sure. So, you know, that's it for me. I'll go back to the members if you have anything you want to follow up on. Councilman Lavelle, if you're there, if you have any questions.
He's dropped off.
Okay. I fully understand from our bi-weekly meetings how understaffed you are, the enormous responsibility you have. Something has to give, I feel, whether it's more for your budget or less responsibilities. So I would love to see what you could take out other than the communications that you're happy, you know, maybe we could take things off of your plate and put them to Public Works. We just made a lot of new hires there, and I don't know what that might look like, but, you know, I think we need to explore either reducing your responsibilities or giving you more staff and wherewithal to take care of the ones you have. So you want to add anything to that before we...
You know, Domi is less than 6 years old, and the responsibilities and the portfolio that we have under one roof was intentional. The vast majority of our staff came from the Department of Public Works, and a need was identified that it wasn't, you know, able to achieve the things that were in sight. And so I don't think that reducing the variety of things that we work on makes sense, because there are efficiencies gained by having, you know, all the structural engineering under one roof, having the traffic safety under the same roof as the resurfacing program, and just pointing out that it was intentional that they were there together. So I think expanding our capacity in the ways that we're able to is definitely my recommendation.
Great job. Anybody else have anything to add or no? Okay, with that, I'll make a motion to recess.
Motion to recess.
Second.
Bye.